Today on the podcast, I'm going to be talking about the best 10 books of the 21st century so far. So if that's something you're interested in, hang around and listen to a novel review. Hello and welcome to the Literature Podcast, a novel review. My name is Seamus, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature. And the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle. So let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of a novel review, a book podcast. My name is Seamus, I am the host, and today we are going to be doing something a little different. Recently, Times did the best 100 books of the 21st century, which I thought was a bit interesting because we're only 24 years into the 21st century. I thought maybe they would have waited for at least a quarter way through, 25 years, but alas, here we are. And it sort of got me thinking about all the books that I've read that are from the 21st century, and I then started to naturally compile my own list. I saw you could do it on Instagram and other social medias. You could compile your own list, go through their list and see what books you've read of their list and compile your own. So I sort of got thinking, I thought it might actually be fun to discuss. I have a page of notes here just so I can remember the books in order and I don't get confused along the way. So it should be a fun episode. I do want to preface a few different things. One, I haven't read every book of the 21st century, so this is purely based on what I have read. Two, we're only 24 years into the 21st century, and while I guess it's kind of very unlikely that I will see the end of the 21st century, given that would make me 106, I think that's probably a bit too long for me to stay alive. This list will be constantly changing, constantly evolving, as all lists should be. Pretty much, especially when you're living through the time that the list is being created. This list should always be changing for everyone all the time because you should be constantly reading and seeking out new books. So this list, if you disagree with it, chances are in a week after I've read another book from the 21st century, I might disagree with it. So it's also really tough. One thing I found, it's really tough to actually remember all the books I've actually read from the 21st century. So I kind of just tried to compile the list very quickly based on gut feeling, like just trying to remember books that I could remember reading and I guess feeling something while reading them. So it's very much I don't want to say rushed because I did put some care and attention into it, but I didn't try labor over too much. I kind of just went on gut instinct where I thought they were, but I'm basically saying that because I have a very sneaky suspicion and a bit of a fear that as soon as I click publish on this episode, I'm going to go, oh my God, how did I forget that book? How did I forget that I've read that book and that book was incredible and be frustrated and angry with myself for forgetting a really great book. But like I said, this is just books that I've read. It also was really difficult to think about books. Like I became suddenly conscious that, it's a list of, top 10 books of the 21st century. And I was like, oh, I've read quite a few books, but I was like, oh, do they make the cut? Do I think they're in one of the top 10 of at least my personal list? Do I think that was a top 10 book that I've read from the 21st century? And it actually became quite tough. I did compile a list of 10. One is incredibly contentious because it was written in the, I was about to say the 18th century, the 20th century, but it was released in English in the 21st century. And I included it because basically I wanted the author represented because I really like the author. I'll get to the list in a second, but yeah, I mean, I basically, if you disagree with this list or you have your own list, please put it in the comments, put your top 10, top 5, top 3, just favorite book. That would be great for everyone as well watching because you could just get a little list of books that you can have a bit of direction. Recently I've been in a couple of bookshops and you just kind of get reader's fatigue sometimes, or maybe purchasing fatigue, I guess, because sometimes you just go in a bookshop and there's just so many books and you're just kind of glossing over them going where do I even start? What I really want is I just want a good book. I just want a good book and I want someone to basically direct me and to say, here's a good book, take it, start reading. And then I just pretty much want to be lazy. So if you comment your favorite books from the 21st century, I get a nice little list, but everyone else listening gets a list as well that they think, I could, dip into that. Or I've seen that author mentioned a few times and now I've seen it again here. It's a good starting point basically. So please feel free to comment your own lists. More than happy to read more books. This is a book podcast, so I'll be constantly reading more books. So please go ahead. So yeah, I guess let's start with number 10. This is the contentious one. That's why I put it at number 10, just because I know it is quite contentious, having been written in the 20th century. But it's Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. I know this book has a lot of issues, but I listened to it. I actually listened to this book, and I listened to it, and I just thought the writing style was so incredibly beautiful. It was it felt, I don't know if it was just the narration style, but it felt like a really constant book. Didn't have, super highs and super lows. It was just like very constant, very flowy. But I know a lot of people sort of hate this book as well because it does have a few issues in it. Toru, the main character, is, I think, quite problematic as well. And the representation of women in it is a bit problematic. But Murakami's writing style was just fantastic. And I was talking to a friend the other day who's also read Norwegian Wood, but he's also read Kafka on the Shore. And he's like, no, you have to read Kafka on the Shore. It's incredible. But I do this weird thing where whenever I've discovered a new author I like, such as Murakami, I naturally then almost put the idea of them on a made-up bookshelf. And I'm like, okay, now I found a good author. Now I'm going to go back out and try to find more good authors. And so I've kind of got like a list of people that I'm like, they're a really good author, and I'm going to come to those books when I come to them knowing that they're going to be good. And it's kind of like when I'm in a real slump and I need a good author, then I can turn to these reliable authors and hopefully not be disappointed. But yeah, I wanted Murakami on the list just because I know as soon as I read another one of his books, it's Norwegian Wood's probably going to be replaced. But I just wanted him on the list because, yeah, Norwegian Wood still was a nice read. It was a really nice narration, and I'm very much looking forward to his future books. So that was number 10. Number 9, we have The Yield by Tara June Winch. She is an Australian author, and it's a wonderful story. It's told in 3 different narrations, 3 different narration points, but mostly the overarching narration is about a woman returning to Australia for a funeral. And it's wonderful because, 1, I'm Australian, so I sort of felt really connected to it for that point. 2, it touches on a lot of Indigenous issues, and one of the storylines is sort of the building of an Indigenous dictionary of the Wiradjuri language, some of the words from their lexicon, is that right? Lexicon, to build out a dictionary. And I guess it was kind of this like person returning home and they're unsure if they fit in or not because they've been away from home so long. And it was kind of that very typical, like, I've been away for so long that I don't really fit in where I am because I know I'm not a native, but now I can't go home because I feel isolated from there as well. And so it was a really beautiful story. And I just really loved it. I'd be curious if, obviously, a lot of the aspects I liked about it were very Australian aspects, and I'd be conscious that a lot of people might not like them, but might not understand them in the same way that I like them. But that's why it's appearing on my top 10. If you have read that book and you didn't like it or you loved it, let me know. That would be cool. Number 8. This book, I've done an episode on this book for this podcast, and I just can't get it out of my head. Poison for Breakfast by Lemony Snicket. It is just such a wonderful, whimsical, enjoyable read. It's incredibly philosophical. It's kind of an autobiography. It's written as Lemony Snicket as the main character, and he's been poisoned, and he spends the day sort of going through life trying to figure out who's poisoned him. And it's just this incredibly simple yet rich story. I listened to this book as well. The narration was just absolutely fantastic. I think it was about 3 hours, so it's incredibly short. It's incredibly brief. I'm a big fan of Lemony Snicket. I grew up reading The Series of Unfortunate Events. They were just the books I was reading ages like 11 to 13. This was my first time going back to Lemony Snicket. I saw it, I think it was free on Audible or something. And I was like, yeah, I'll try to give it a go. It's, 3.5 hours. And it was just, his style is just probably not for everyone, which is so fine, but it's just an incredibly whimsical story. It's incredibly light. It's incredibly refreshing. It deals with some really interesting topics, some really deep philosophical ideas, but he just does it in such a comical way that it really it just leaves you with this book coming to the end and you're like, yeah, wow, I had a lot of fun reading it or listening to it. But it also got me thinking as well about certain things. And I really enjoyed that because it sort of penetrates different areas of life and really simple areas of life. I remember there was one talking about, like, we call birds birds, but birds don't call themselves birds. That's just a name we've given to them and attached to them. The nature of a supermarket and how convenience is just replacing quality. All these kinds of things, they're just sort of tied in this very, very flowy, enjoyable little story. So that was number 8. Number 7, A Little Life by Hanya Yanigihara. Another book that I know a lot of people love and a lot of people hate. There seems to be no sort of in the middle. I liked it. I loved it. I read Hanya Yanigihara's first book for university, All the People in the Trees, and I absolutely did not like it. In fact, I quite hated it, actually. It was this incredibly... I thought it wasn't that interesting a story, but I was talking to someone about it the other day. Who was that? I can't remember. Doesn't matter. And they absolutely loved it. I'm going to stop talking about that book because we're not talking about that book. We're talking about A Little Life. Basically, I started reading A Little Life and it was incredibly enjoyable. I don't think she's not a writer that fills her work with, and this is just off the top of my head, fills her work with like metaphors and similes and really kind of flowery, rich English language. I feel like she's quite a direct writer. You know, it's very straight, it's very narrow. Not in a way that it's limiting, but she's just not cutting through. She's just, bang, straight down the middle. And it's a story about 4 boys, mostly following one of the boys, Jude, and his life living through just copious amounts of abuse. It was a great story when it came out. It came out in 2015. I think it was runner-up in the Booker. I think Marlon James won it that year for A Brief History of 7 Killings. But it was an incredibly good story. It was so much better than her first book. I haven't read her third book, To Paradise, but apparently that's also quite good. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting. I love a big book, and I love a cradle to grave kind of story, getting an overview of one person's life, or in this case, a few people's lives. And I just had a great time. Like I felt very in amongst New York City. It takes place in New York, and I felt like New York was a background character. And it was just this heartbreakingly struggle of a story. I don't even know if I'd call it a beautiful story. It was just like a heartbreaking story about this person and the abuse they suffer through. So I think that deserves to be there. Number 7. Number 6, The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams. This was a beautiful story. This was a lot of fun. There's a few darker moments in it, but it's mostly about this young girl growing up, and her dad and the people he works with are putting together the first Oxford English dictionary. And so she spends a lot of her childhood underneath the table in the scrippy, the scriptorium where they're assembling it, underneath the table, and she gathers the occasional script, which are little, pieces of paper with words on it. And through this, you kind of get this really nice story of this girl growing up amongst, like a pretty big moment in history, I guess, the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary. And it's just sort of like her experience with that. It starts off, you think it's kind of like whimsical and fun because it's just this girl existing in this like high literary sort of society life. But then it turns into something really nice, and that she starts to realize that a lot of feminine words aren't being included in the dictionary because the dictionary is put together by all men. And so a lot of these words are sort of not being included. And then spoiler, it ends with her creating this sort of dictionary of lost words. It's kind of in the title, but it's a beautiful story, really nice. Another Australian author, actually. And I know she's got a follow-up book, The Bookbinder of Jericho, which I mentioned on this podcast before. I'm really keen to read that because apparently there's a bit of overlap between the stories, but really nice story. Had a lot of fun reading it, just like a really solid, enjoyable, fun story. So I would definitely recommend that. That's the first 5. That's 10 to 6. Now we got 5 to 1. Okay, here we go. Trust, Hernan Diaz. This book was incredible. This took me by surprise. This took me by surprise a lot. This book is pretty much, the way I would sum this book up is if The Great Gatsby met The Big Short, the film. It is like all the acquiring of wealth and decadence of the 20s and 30s that appears in The Great Gatsby. I know that takes place in just the 20s, but sort of that period mixed with The Big Short of just like insane banking story. and it's incredibly fun. It's I think it was 3 or 4 parts, and it's an incredibly interesting style because if I'm remembering correctly, the first section of the book isn't even part of the story, in a sense that it's actually a fictive retelling of these people's lives, and you sort of get that, and then you get the people's lives. And so it's this wonderful tale where you are constantly trying to figure out who is actually telling the truth, because pretty much everyone's an unreliable narrator. It was an incredibly interesting way to tell a story. You come to the end of it just going, what the hell was all that? Who's telling the truth? I remember I got about halfway through and I was listening to it and I was like, no, I need to start this again because I've just haven't been paying enough attention. And I got to the end and was completely blown away. It was absolutely incredible. It's the kind of book that's definitely going to reward a reread, and I'm definitely going to reread it. It was so much fun. I think it came out 2021. I think it was even nominated for the Booker, shortlisted for the Booker. And it was just an incredible story where you are just left wondering, not scratching your head as in like that was a mystery, a murder mystery or anything like that, but you just come away going, oh my God, I've been given enough information to believe this person, but enough information to believe this person, but now this person's saying something completely different, and you're just kind of like left wondering who was actually telling the truth. And I won't say any more than that other than go read it. It was a great, great book. Number 4, this book also took me by surprise a lot. And I've done an episode on it for this podcast. I've done it quite recently, actually. And as soon as I read it, if you'd asked me, it was definitely going to be in the top 10. It's Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Another author that I know I absolutely loved. And at the time, I really wanted to jump into her other book. I think it's The Strange Case of Mr. Norrell and Mr. Strange, Dr. Strange, something like that. And I looked at it in the bookshop the other day. It's like 1,000 pages, and I really wanted to buy it to jump into it because I was trying to find a book that's really kind of comforting in the way that Piranesi was and a really nice storytelling. And I just said, no, it's there. It's on the shelf. It's ready to go. We'll get to it when we get to it. But right now, we'll find something else to read. Piranesi was incredible. Seen it a lot on like the various apps, TikTok, Instagram, and was quite wary of it just because I thought it was just going to be one of these TikTok books that sort of has a very sort of goes very hot, you know, is on fire basically for like a brief moment. It's like the lighting of a match and just like flames up. And then all of a sudden it just dies away because suddenly people realize it's not really that good a story. It just kind of like was on the hype train. And no, this book definitely deserves it, all the hype it gets, because it was absolutely incredible. It's about a man living in these endless halls. It's sci-fi. I mean, I could talk about it for so long because I did an episode on it, but honestly, if you have read it and want to go check it out, I did an episode. It must have been like 10 episodes ago now. Pretty easy to find, but that book was just an incredible amount of fun mixed with some great storytelling, some great writing, really fresh idea, and really, really enjoyed it. Number 3. This is a book I read for university. And when you're studying literature at university, my undergraduate was literature and ancient history. And so I'd be doing 2 literature classes and 2 ancient history classes. And each literature class wants you to read a different story a week, a different novel a week. And ancient history just has equivalent amounts of readings to read. So you get quite overwhelmed and you sort of have to make decisions eventually about which books you're going to read and which books you're going to have to skip for that week. And this was a book I actually skipped. And then I can't remember why, but we kind of figured out that it was going to be in the exam, the end of year exam. So I had to sort of read it. And I remember I sat down and I was like, okay, I'm just going to read like the first few chapters and then sort of skim it from there, really get an overview, read a Wikipedia page, Spark Notes, all that kind of stuff. And after a few chapters, I remember it was a stinking hot day in Australia. It was summertime. It was nearly summer. And I sat down and just read the book all day. It was simply incredible. Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro came out in 2005. Another book that took me by surprise because I didn't expect it to be this good. It is just a wonderful story, technically about humanity and the beauty that humans can offer. But in this stage, there's sort of this mystery threaded throughout the story that really kind of, I don't think confuses you, but keeps you reading and keeps you wondering what they're sort of talking about. And there seems to be this like darkness below the text that you can't quite get at for a lot of the story. And then once it's revealed, you're like, oh, that's what's going on here. It was an incredibly beautiful story. They have done a film for it. I watched the film. It's definitely not as good, which, Kel Surprise, we all knew that was going to happen, but they just missed the complete subtlety of the mystery that's threaded throughout this story. It was simply beautiful. I haven't gone back to read it, and I know there's more Ishiguro that I want to read as well, but I absolutely would reread this book again because it was just so beautiful. I'd be interested to know if it does hold up, because obviously now I've got such a fond memory of it on that hot summer's day, reading it in pretty much one go. So I guess that might actually scare me to reread it, because I don't know if I want to taint that memory of just this incredibly beautiful book that I read. And it was great. And then I went into an exam and wrote an essay on it, and I can't remember the score I got. I probably failed or something. I don't know. Final two books. These are the only two books that I would say would be, for me personally, a lock on my 21st century list. These are the only two books that I would feel pretty confident that I want to keep them there forever. Every other book, 3 to 10, I think would probably be at risk at some point. Judging, well, hopefully, the next 74 years bring some good books. But these first two books are really kind of the books that I would happily have on my list as solid locks. Whether they'd be number 2 and 1 is a different story, but I'd be quite comfortable if they were still there at the end. Number 2 is Small Things Like These by Clarke Keegan. I've done another episode on this bit before that, and it was an absolutely incredible book. It had been around for a while, and a few people had recommended it, and I'd kind of, just avoided it for a bit. Sometimes you get recommended a book, and you're just like, no, I don't want to read that, thanks though. But I had to read it. I say I had to read it. No, I did have to read it because I'm in a book club, and that was the book we chose that month. It was, we read it in December last year, 2023, because it's technically a Christmas story in that it's the 3 weeks lead up to Christmas. And it's 112 pages, and it was incredible. Clarke Keegan's writing style is just phenomenal. I've spoken about her twice now on this podcast, Small Things Like These episode, and her other book, Foster. I absolutely can't wait to read her other books, but Small Things Like These was just phenomenal. I thought it was so incredibly brief, so incredibly sharp, but the silences in the novel just speak louder than the words that are written on the page. And the beauty and, again, the humanity that shines through in this book is just out of control. It's absolutely stunning. I absolutely loved it. Every year for Christmas, I read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and I always try to read that and finish it sort of Christmas Eve. And I've got a nice little hardcover copy up there. But I've been thinking I might also start reading Small Things Like These every Christmas as well, because you just get that feeling. It's the lead up to Christmas. It's incredibly brief book as well, which helps. So I think that's going to be a book that I start reading once a year because it was phenomenal, and I absolutely could not recommend that book enough. I have seen that they are going to make a film out of it, and Cillian Murphy is going to be playing the main character, which is pretty cool. I'd be interested to see how it does it because, like I said, the silences of this book, sort of what's written between the lines, is a really important aspect, and that really sort of carries this story. So looking forward to that and to see how they pull it off, if they pull it off at all. Number one. In fact, it was the first episode I did on this podcast, Cormac McCarthy, The Road. I was tossing up between The Road or No Country for Old Men because both are stunning books, but I think at the end of the day, I just wanted Cormac McCarthy represented on this list. If you've never read any McCarthy, he is just a tour de force. The Road is by no means his best book. His best book is definitely Blood Meridian. That is just a monster of a book. If I did a 20th century list, that would definitely be appearing on there. But The Road is just, again, it's kind of incredible how a book can be so sparsely written and yet be so dense at the same time. His language style and structure is just so incredibly biblical almost. It's an incredibly dark story. Another story really about humanity. It's about a father and son in North America, just trying to get basically from A to B. And there's been it's a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The ability Cormac McCarthy has to describe a landscape is just phenomenal. This is a book, I think I've read it 2 or 3 times now. It's absolutely incredible. That being said, No Country for Old Men is also incredible as well. I'd definitely recommend reading that. I'd recommend reading all McCarthy's work because it's just so beautiful. I recently read The Passengers, which is his technically second last book before he tragically passed away last year. And that is just McCarthy. I mean, McCarthy's style is just McCarthy's style. If you've read McCarthy, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He is just an absolute tour de force. And it's an incredible book. 2005 or 2006, I think it was 2006 it came out. It is absolutely brutal. It's absolutely one of the darkest, I was going to say one of the darkest books, but McCarthy's other books are just as dark. Blood Meridian is one of, if not the darkest book I've ever read. Most bloodthirsty, most ruthless book I've ever read, but the road is just so, I don't know, helpless, hopeless, but there's also glimmers of hope here and there that just keep you reading and keep you hoping for something, and it's just the determination of the human struggle in this book is just on display for all. It's an incredible book. I would absolutely recommend it. And that's why it is coming in at number 1 on my favorite books of the 21st century, my top 10 books of the 21st century so far. What a good list, I think, at least. If you don't like it, yeah, let me know. Tell me your books. That would be great. I was sitting looking at this list on this printed piece of paper, just sort of like decompressing it a bit. 5 women, 5 men, which I thought was pretty cool. That's not some woke agenda. That was literally just how it came to be, which I'm very happy about, actually, because I think if you're new to reading and you took a scattergun approach to reading, you'd probably more often than not hit a man than a woman. So it's good to know, especially in the 20th century. I don't know why I keep saying 18th, 20th century and before. So I'm enjoying the fact that that feels quite balanced for a list. I listened to 5 of these books, which I found interesting on Audible. I found that really interesting. I listened to Norwegian Wood, Poison for Breakfast, Dictionary of Lost Words, Trust, and Piranesi. I found that quite interesting. I didn't realize I listened to that many books, but I guess I only listen to books and music. So that's kind of cool. The other thing I found really, really cool is 2 Australian authors on this, Tara June Winch and Pip Williams, The Yield and the Dictionary of Lost Words. And in both of those books, there are the compilings of dictionary. In The Yield, there is a sub-narrative of the Wiradjuri words being compiled into a dictionary. And Dictionary of Lost Words, there is it's not even a sub-story, it's pretty much the main story of a dictionary being compiled, the Dictionary of Lost Words. And I found that really interesting, actually, because I did not think about that when I was reading the 2 stories, and I would have read them pretty close together, but I didn't even consider that. So interesting, to say the least. I don't know, just something that I noticed, which I found kind of cool. So that was my top 10 books of the 21st century so far. Thank you for listening this far. If you have listened this far, please consider hitting the 5 stars. I would really appreciate it. Also, feel free to like and subscribe and go to the website and support the pod in other ways. But as always, just thank you for your attention. So I think it's time to end this episode. And today I was in a bookshop, not today, in another day I was in a bookshop and took this picture of what a book lover is. And it is a person devoted to reading. One who would rather stay inside and read than go outside and play. Not sure I'd do that, I'd go outside and read. Someone who gets lost in a story and loves to dream with open eyes. Beware, never disturb a book lover when he or she is reading. Results can be fatal.